You also talk about, which is a subsection of the first one, sell down.
It is, yeah.
Transition from growth to income assets. It might be worth double clicking on that, Paul, because you've got a lot of experience around this and some of the nuances and some of the detail around this. I'd be interested from your POV.
Absolutely. It's certainly probably, I mean, I'm not going to say it's for everyone, but what I refer to in this process here is and anyone who's bought property, let's call it, 10 or probably more like 20, 30, 40, 50 plus year old, single story, brick and tile, 600 square meter blocks in certain parts of major capital cities. If you've done any of that over the last 20 to 30 years, or even the last 10 to 15 years, you've probably been aware that there's been changes to zoning in that property that you own. Now, what I think is something that happens over time with holding property in a country that has an increased demand, increased population, and scarcity of actual developable land within close proximity to amenities, is the utility of land becomes more useful for different developments that typically become higher density. So going from a single dwelling to potentially the ability to build a duplex, to potentially then to subdivide, or even things as simple as a granny flat, then to more sophisticated things like townhouses, medium density, high density apartments. Now, there's a range of different things that can happen with property, whether that means that you hold a property which has this zoning and it makes it feasible for you to do so. Obviously, it's a very case-by-case basis. But I've actually found, and ironically, I got a phone call about an hour before we got on air today from a client who we bought a property from, in 2019. I can speak specifically to the screen in front of me here. I'm looking at plans. We bought a property that had plans and permits for a 6-townhouse development in the north of Brisbane in 2019. I think we paid $447,000 for that property. It's on an 880 square metre block. Had approved townhouse plans with it. He hasn't done anything with it. The property's done exceptionally well from a valuation standpoint. The call came today, though, that he's looking at not necessarily retiring, but probably walking away from his current job in the next 12 months. And he's thinking, well, if I'm going to do this, I want to figure out my FISO. If I want to do it, is the FISO worth doing it versus what it's worth today and just selling it? Or do I need to sell it at all? But am I going to be able to get finance if I do this in 12 months? And the answer is probably no. So he's thinking about starting this process now while he's still got a paycheck that he can go to the bank and borrow against. That is a strategy which we talked loosely about the fact that there's probably a feasibility to build those 6 townhouses. I ran through some basic square metre rate numbers, what they'd sell for, and the intention is probably to sell 4 and keep 2 and still keep skin in the game and probably walk away with no debt on that asset, higher income, obviously new properties, depreciation, better rental, no maintenance, etc. That's an example of something that was bought 6 years ago, has had probably more ability to have that as the uplift and the value, and that because that DA approval back 6 years ago, whilst it was there, it wasn't really had any value, because to go and build those properties, there was no ROI in that type of development. Now, that's a bit of an extreme case. I don't think people need to lend their mind too much towards building 6 townhouses as something that might be on their horizon. But it's probably one of those strategies where he's not actually planning to exit that property and sell down the entire thing. He's planning to maximize it, sell a portion, keep a portion, but walk away with a higher yield versus where the value is, and retire debt as part of that same strategy.
Again, this is why Paul is well respected by the industry, and why he's also thinking in terms of long term, because we talk about in the book, and we talk about with our clients, productive use of land and margin of safety. Now, Paul's just giving you away a bit of gold there. Brick and tile properties on that were built 40, 50 years ago have a land to asset ratio that is incredibly favourable, where you can buy the asset now, hold on to it, rent it out. It's producing income from day one. But in 12 years, 15 years, 20 years, if you're in a financial position where you can turn 1 into 2 or 1 into 3 or 1 into 4, and so that is another way of producing that additional income, as part of that. And of course, because you're building them outright, you get the full depreciation associated with that. And then ultimately that's accelerating your passive income. Now, at the end of the day, those types of strategies shouldn't be teased to people who are just beginning. It's a journey that you want to take them on. And it's the same sort of reason why Bryce and I have, not talked about trust and not talked about SMSF lending and getting those hype things happening to bring in the young, enthusiastic amateurs like Bryce and I were some, 30 odd years ago to buy into that story. What you need to do is take them on a journey. Just buy 2 or 3 really good ones, sit on them, and then ultimately you might have some choices about what that exit strategy looks like. And it may not be an exit strategy at all. What it could be is turning that land into a higher productive use, which will then make that land more valuable. But of course, it'll produce the income that will be accelerated throughout retirement. And again, you've got to do your models because there's going to be debt potentially. But if you've got access to super or an inheritance that's coming through transition from your parents or whatever it is, like that is part of why it's case by case. It's understanding what's happening here. We know the government wants more density in the established areas, which really tells a great story.
Absolutely. I'll leave one last anecdote to that story as well. It was actually, I think it might have been Domain or realestate.com released something maybe only this week, and people can go and probably click this on depending on when they're listening to it. But there was a story on a couple, I think it was in the mid-1970s, and it was actually a video, I think it might have been an ABC interview, essentially talking about the good old classics, rolling out the affordability. Sydney was too expensive in the mid-1970s. There was a couple with 3 kids, and they bought their first home in Mount Druitt. He paid $6,400 for it in this interview. It was a fibro on a 700 odd square metre block of land, and just sold. So that same family held it the entire time, and they actually recycled that original footage from the mid-70s to now, and it sold, surprise, surprise, for I think it was touch under $1 million, $980,000. The cash on cash return, when you talk about it, even a 50% deposit is insane.
Yes, it's crazy.
But again, it's not being sold to an owner occupier. It's going to be sold to someone who's going to be knocking it down and building, I think, 4 or 6 townhouses. It's the utility of the land that's increased. It was an old fibro when they bought it. It wasn't brand new. It was, I think, about an 8 to 10-year-old fibro at the time. It's not complicated. It's a property that was on the fringes. It's been built out. It's gentrifying. Density is changing, and the value is now increased, and it's going to be fed through the generations.